All right, everyone. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Before we go any farther, I want to introduce a little bit about the simultaneous English to Spanish and vice versa interpretation that we have for today's session. In a moment, you will see the option to choose the language you would like to listen and participate in today. It'll show up in your Zoom controls as a small kind of globe network with interpretation underneath it. And you can select English or Spanish once given the option. I'd like to introduce our colleague Lucia from the Colorado Language Connection to explain a little bit more how this works in Spanish before we get the feature going.
Hi, I'm Lucia. Hola, soy Lucia. Voy a ser su intérprete para hoy. Si quieren, pueden agregar la tecla abajo y le va a traducir simultáneamente todo lo que es la junta en español también.
Great, thank you, Lucia. And I will enable the interpretation feature now. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Once again, everyone, thank you for joining our session today. Colorado, tell your data story. We're talking about what is your data, what data is available. And as Zach just joined us on video, we would love to invite others to do so as well. We'll go through a few of our kind of Zoom agreements that we've established here next. Oh, actually, we're going to introduce our facilitators. So hi, everyone. I'm Melina Taniuchi. I am the project manager for the Colorado Equity Compass. And today I am joined by Rochelle Espiritu and Eve Kucharski from our team. I don't believe Scott is able to join our team today, but he's always working in the background as our partners within the Colorado Equity Compass Collaborative. All right, so here are the Zoom agreements. We welcome you to join on camera. We will have ours on for this session, and it helps us to create a little bit of a community here. If you're able to join, we welcome you to do so, and we entirely recognize if you are not able to. We also ask that if you're not able to participate today with an via audio, in terms of speaking, we would ask you to put in asterisks by your name so we know. You can do that by clicking on the 3 little dots over your name in Zoom and choosing to rename yourself and then type in an asterisk. We also ask that you be an active participant in the session. We welcome you to raise your hand through the Zoom controls, wave on video if you're trying to get our attention, and speak up both in the chat and in through your microphones. We welcome everyone to create an interactive session here today. As already mentioned, and for those who are joining a little bit later, we do have live simultaneous interpretation, Spanish to English and vice versa, through the little globe or network looking icon in your Zoom controls. If you have any issues with that, please let us know. And then our session is also being recorded today, as we have done previous sessions. As I said, we would love to have as much interaction as possible between us and participants today. But if you are not comfortable with having your responses in our discussion or your chats kind of publicized in some ways, let us know. You can do that by private messaging me, and that's in the chat box. When you click on that, you'll see a little blue icon with a downward arrow that says to everyone, and you can choose me instead. So that's Alina Taniuchi. All right, we can go on to the next part here. So diving into a little bit of what you can expect out of today, we are going to spend some time learning about different types of data, including building some common knowledge together around why both qualitative and quantitative data are important. We'll be looking at data with an equity lens, so that includes strategies for community engagement, as well as different data sources and kind of how to look at that from an ethical perspective. And then we'll also talk about some different sources of data and figuring out which ones to use for your data storytelling efforts. So now we'll just preview for you once again. Probably heard this a lot if you've been with us before, but we do have some upcoming sessions that you can see here on screen. I won't read through all of them today, but we welcome you to check those out. And we do have a link that we can share with you all as well to register if you haven't yet. You're welcome to attend all or whichever ones pique your interest. So now I'm going to pass it over to Eve to do a little community builder so we can get to know each other better today.
Thank you so much, Alina. Yes, we are going to just break the ice a little bit here and get us thinking about this as it relates to our topic. I will share this in the chat as well, but I would love for you to think about what is your relationship with data and what emotions come up for you when you hear that term. Thank you for sharing, Rochelle. For me, I might start just to get things rolling. When I hear data, I actually get kind of excited thinking about the source that we might use for storytelling, because that is a lot of what my role revolves around, and thinking through the Colorado Equity Compass's functions and really connecting with community. But I do know that when you think about the term data, it can also sort of feel sterile and kind of without community in a lot of senses. And so for me, I think that's why qualitative applications of it are really excellent to sort of bring out that community element. So, and actually, I suppose I didn't share my location and role. I'm actually, as you can see behind me, possibly the only member of our team not based in Colorado. I am in beautiful Seattle, Washington, but happily joining you here today from the West Coast. And very excited to get into this part of data storytelling. Oh, thank you so much, Heather, for sharing. I appreciate that, data nerd, and especially like when data can make a story better. Yes, I do appreciate that. And I agree, Alina. I too also, it can be overwhelming, but it helps. It definitely helps to really add that element of storytelling that is necessary. Yeah, I relate. The love-hate relationship can certainly be overwhelming. And also, I welcome people to unmute if you feel comfortable. If there's something that you'd like to share, I welcome you to do so now. I appreciate that comment. Yes, there is nothing better than a properly formatted data file. And actually, I think that maybe I'm one of the people who might not be able to do it the best. So I stick to sort of the qualitative element. But we need people who can format. I agree. You also notice on this slide, we have sort of like an emotion wheel that sort of might help spark interest and sort of inspiration when you're thinking through, how does this make me feel? And maybe what are some of the emotions tied to it?
Oh, one thing. Oh, hey, I'm Zach and I'm in Durango. One thing I really like to try and do with data, and this is definitely a result of a lot of teaching and education in my background, is trying to figure out how to not just present a big mess of data and be like, here's some neat stuff. I think it's neat. It is neat, but how to get someone to say, hey, that's pretty neat, whether kind of nudging them to discover it themselves, or maybe just presenting it and being like, this is really neat, and just like giving it in that context where they can kind of hold on to it a bit more. Like I said, that's probably from a strong teaching background, trying to get stuff to stick in there.
Thanks so much for sharing, Zach. Yeah, it is so important to contextualize too, and especially when we think about sharing out to the broader public, it is, not everybody has the same data background, so that context can really help. But yeah, appreciate it. Oh, thank you for sharing, Annie. Yes, being a visual person myself, it can be hard to process. And also welcome Annie, who has helped us out on Colorado Equity Compass work before. So thank you for joining. Is there anybody else who might like to unmute and share? All right, well, no problem at all if you don't want to. Thank you so much for everybody who shared in the chat. Apologies if I missed your comment, but I think this is a great exercise to get us really thinking about it and lead us into the next part of the presentation. So Alina, I will pass it to you.
Thanks, Eve. And we'll move to the next slide where I will share a quote that actually Rochelle found through some of our colleagues at Informing Change, but I guess via another person's words as well. So this is kind of a nice overview of a different way of maybe thinking about data. I think sometimes it feels kind of hard and difficult to approach, and maybe it isn't unapproachable, but there's so much that is in data and so much possibility that comes from it as well. So I'll just read this here. Data is an extension of a person or groups of people, and therefore should be treated as you would treat people, respectfully. For instance, data are words, thoughts, feelings, expressions, interactions, and contributions from individual people. It is not abstract, objective, nor distant or removed from people. And that's from Billy Joel Rogers, Reciprocal Consulting. So that kind of leads us into our first little activity today. We would love for you to participate in this Mentimeter, which I believe Rochelle will be adding to the chat shortly. But we're asking, what do you consider data? What are kind of types of data that you've used, or things that you maybe feel drawn to? I think some of that came out a little bit in the community builder, but would love to ask, what are things that you consider to be data, to kind of get us going today? And you can go to menti.com and use the code that's on the screen, or you can follow the link that Rochelle has pasted into the chat. Thanks, Rochelle. Yes, I love the testimonials. We've got stats, stories. I know Eve is doing a little happy dance for seeing that one pop up there. Data is anything that tells a story about a particular subject. It can be numbers or stories. Yeah. Organized or organizable goes back to the well-cleaned spreadsheets for sure. Interviews, photos, videos, pictures. Yeah, lots of pictures in there. Newspapers, magazines, articles. Ooh, I like that bias in there. That's a nice little addition. Yeah, we'll get to talking a little bit more about those and how we introduce our own biases as kind of like data collectors, data users, whatever it might be. Survey results. We got a little bit more coming in if you scroll down, I think. A collection of information that will tell us a story or numbers of something. Awesome. Well, thank you all. Feel free to continue to add to that. And I think that's just a nice way, social media posts. Yeah, sometimes we don't think about those things that kind of surround us every day, but there's so much data that gets collected in a very organic way through social media posts. Awesome. And we can talk a little bit more about those different kinds of data. So as someone had entered in, we do have kind of ways that we often try and sort or organize our data in terms of quantitative and qualitative data. So these are terms that maybe you're familiar with and maybe you aren't. Quantitative data is a lot of those things that are countable, measurable. They relate to numbers. We saw a lot about stats and numbers show up in that, the Mentimeter. It can tell us how much or how often we have something that's going on, or how many we have. So how many people there are that are involved in communities, how often maybe someone is visiting or receiving school lunches or something like that. They're fixed and universal, so it's easily kind of translatable between different spaces, because numbers are a little bit more of that common measure that we all have. And then we have also qualitative data. So we saw a lot in that Mentimeter around photos, videos, pictures, stories. There's a lot more kind of depth oftentimes that comes in through qualitative data in terms of getting to more of that story that's happening. As important as numbers are, sometimes, you know, that old saying of pictures are worth 1,000 words, right? There's so much that is deep within our qualitative data that's dynamic, and it brings in some of that biases too, right? So there are different ways that one person might look at a picture. Thinking about art, you know, it's so subjective. Someone might look at a picture and think one thing, and another will bring in all of their experiences to have another kind of perspective on that. So it's a really important aspect of data, and something that is not always recognized. You know, people have sometimes these hard and fast rules around what makes up data, but there's so much in our everyday lives that includes there. And it can also help to illustrate more around the quantitative data that we have. So it can tell us the why and how, and it can be gathered in ways that maybe feel a little bit more exciting or accessible for community members as well. So, you know, someone shows up at your door asking to fill out a survey, that's one thing that you might be like, no, I'm good, as important as that is. But then you also might have photos, like projects like Photo Voice, where you go out in your community and you say, hey, you know, take a picture of what you're seeing, what's illustrating this issue or this topic or this solution that you're really interested in saying something more about. So there are just different ways that people engage with and feel familiar with data. But they're both important. So that's actually leading into our next question on Mentimeters, is why are both of those important? How have you seen that maybe show up in your own lives? How has that been impactful or helped you think about something in a different way? So I think it's the same link, if I'm correct, Rochelle. Yeah, so you can use that same link again, and I will paste it in the chat just in case we've had anyone else join. Thanks, Eve. So again, yeah, the question that we're asking now is why are both of these important? How have you seen these maybe play together in a way that help to tell a more impactful story or a more full story? All right. Quantitative data provides good numbers and counts, while qualitative data can bring the quantitative data to life. Yes. That's a great testimonial. You could add that one to the website. They balance each other. Give a more rounded picture of information when used together. Yeah. Metrics are hard to measure and can benefit from more from a longer form and full environment observation. Qualitative can help continue the story where the quantitative might not stretch as far. It's beautiful, yeah. Sometimes each kind of data might tell a different story. Yeah, that's true. You might have instances, we've talked about this before. We actually had a pilot site that we engaged in the earlier years of the Colorado Equity Compass, where, you know, they kind of had this idea in their neighborhood that they were in a food desert, and it turned out that they were in a food swamp, where they, looking at the data, it kind of told them, no, they have a lot of grocery stores in the area by the numbers, or food places by the numbers. But then when you look more deeply into it, it was actually like gas stations and liquor stores rather than someplace that you could buy fresh and healthy foods. So they kind of gathered two different types of data or multiple types of data there in order to tell actually what was going on. Yeah, so they can connect with more people. Some people connect with numbers and others with stories. Yeah, very true. That's great. Well, thank you all for participating in that. I believe I'm passing it over to Rochelle at this point to go a little bit deeper into some data ethics, which I swear is not as intimidating as it might sound.
Thanks, Alina. And thank you everyone for participating in this. I think it's really helpful for us to kind of see where people are coming from into this conversation. So what we wanted to share with you was this idea of ethical considerations along the whole way. So we're bringing this concept in, although we've already talked about kind of what is the topic that we're interested in our communities, and talked about social determinants of health in our last session. And so now we're moving into what data is available related to maybe our interests. And we wanted to introduce this idea of really moving from doing no harm, which is probably something that many of you have heard of in terms of a concept in research and evaluation, towards really thinking about how are we actually adding value to community? How are we doing this with care and consideration? And so this is a movement idea that was presented in the Data Ethics Guidebook and Toolkit that our colleague Michael Arnold had worked on. And so what we wanted to do was offer you some questions to ask yourself. So really, the first question is around why is even the research or evaluation being undertaken in the first place? So that data that is being collected, what's the interest? What's the purpose behind that? And so that kind of leads into what ends up being counted. What kind of data is relevant in your community? As researchers and evaluators too, we think it's also important to ask ourselves who gets to decide what research or evaluation gets done, and who makes those decisions along the way in terms of what questions are asked, who collects the data, and all those kinds of things, and how is data shared back with community. So we wanted us to kind of just remember that behind all this data, as Alina showed in the first quote, are people, real people, and it's connected to those people in those communities. And so we want to make sure that we're treating data with a lot of care and consideration in our processes. We also want to note that when we're thinking about data, and I think this was brought up in one of the responses, that oftentimes we bring our own biases into the data, both in terms of how we ask the question and how we interpret the data, et cetera. And so we want to make sure that we're aware of that, and we're kind of thinking about that we're thinking about our data with that lens. And thank you, Eve. I had to slow down. I wasn't looking at the screen. Sorry, Lucia. All right, so we can move on to the next slide. And this is where we wanted to talk about community engagement. And we're not talking about, for this session, we're not talking about community engagement and input in terms of data collection, but we're talking about it in terms of how you might identify data that already exists. So we know that community engagement is important. We know that inclusion and representation helps to honor the lived experience and the wisdom that are in our communities. And so as you're looking for existing data in your community, we encourage you to engage with community and to ask what data already exists in our community. And part of that is really so that we're considering burden on communities. Many of the communities that we work in have been over-researched and over-evaluated, and historically, oftentimes, communities don't benefit from the data that is collected. So we want to make sure that we're finding out about what exists, what experiences have happened with previous data collection so that you have that context. And when you engage community members around who needs to be represented and included in data, what data needs to be represented, they're going to identify hopefully data that maybe we didn't know existed. And so that's going to influence the kind of data that are identified. And so engaging community can also help you think more creatively about what exists, what the context is for data that might be out there, and then just help provide, as was mentioned in the Mentimeter, a real fuller picture of the issue that you're trying to learn more about. So as you're thinking about engaging community to identify data, think about who you'll reach out to, how you'll do that. So how will you engage? What kinds of agreements might need to be made? We've done previous trainings around data agreements and like memorandum of understanding around data, because sometimes data is oftentimes it's owned by a particular group, or if it was collected by a university, oftentimes the university will own that data. And so there are often conversations and relationships that need to be navigated when you're looking to use existing data. I'm just going to pause there because I know Alina and I have been talking for a while, just to see if there are any questions or comments that folks have before we go into thinking about data with an equity lens. Feel free to unmute or to type in the chat too. Okay, well, we're definitely going to spend time in small groups. So I know that's also a time where people can share experiences also. So we'll go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about choosing data with an equity lens. We have a couple of images in here from We All Count, which is a great resource. Actually, I forgot to put their website in our notes, but we'll pop that in later. They just have some incredible trainings and toolkits that help to just keep equity at the forefront as you're thinking about your data, your collection efforts, how you share the data back with community, et cetera. Thank you, Eve. But we wanted to offer these questions for you as you're thinking about existing data in your communities or in the region or the state. So as you're identifying data that exists, these are a couple of questions to keep in mind. So who was affected or impacted in this part of the data collection? So we often like to think about the people most impacted by the issue that's being researched or evaluated, and how does the data impact them? How were they included in the data collection efforts or in the identification? Was it extractive, or did it feel like the data study, the evaluation was an effort that was really kind of thinking along that continuum of doing no harm to like doing with care and to give back? It's also important to, when you're looking at existing data, to ask yourself who was like purposefully included in this data collection effort and who was excluded, whose voices are missing from this process. So really these questions are encouraging you to be kind of critical thinkers of existing data, and to find out like what in the next question, who was maybe benefited, who benefited from the collection of that data and who might have been harmed. And so it just is good to keep these questions in mind so that when you're using the data, you're doing it again with care and honoring the people whose information was collected. Are there any other questions that people ask themselves or that you ask yourself, I guess, when you're looking at data? Just curious to find out, like, what questions do you ask when you're looking at existing data, secondary data that you might be using or relying on? Okay, well, we are going to move. Oh, Ariel, thanks for asking that. How old is the data? Great question. As we're thinking about kind of the credibility of the information and how relevant it might be, that's a really important question to ask. One thing that we didn't put up on here was like who collected the data, right? Or who actually funded the data collection, because oftentimes there are particular requirements or criteria or interests that a funder will have. And so making sure that there is understanding of even why this all like why this data was collected is really important. All right. We can go on to the next question. And were people whose data collected, were they compensated for their time and effort? Yeah, that's important to note. And I think the field has moved into definitely being more responsive and valuing people's time and experience through that way. Okay. Thank you, Alina. I'm going to turn it back over to you to share with participants a little bit around a tool that we're offering as part of this series and some reflective questions.
Yeah, thank you, Rochelle. And I would welcome everyone to get up and stretch a little bit if you'd like while I'm going through this. For folks who were with us last week, you will have already seen this tool. There are some kind of updated instructions for you just around how to bring a new slide in for you to continue building out your toolkit. But I just wanted to share with all of you, we've created this kind of guide that goes alongside this learning series that we're hosting, where you can start to develop your data story as we go through every session. So I've added the link to that below, and I will share my screen actually quickly to show you all what to do once you're in that. So this is our little tool for you all to use. Every couple of weeks when we host these sessions, we're adding a new slide that goes along the learning that we're having here together. So for those who are seeing this for the first time, we know that folks can join for one or many of the sessions. For those who are seeing this for the first time, we welcome you to go and make a copy of it so that you can make your own file and build on that over time. So when you enter that link, you'll see you shouldn't have editing privileges on this specific document, but you can select to make a copy of it. So when you go up to File, make a copy, and then you can select Entire Presentation. And then it'll give you some prompts of where you'd like to copy it to and whether you'd like to share it with folks. You don't need to do that. We welcome you to share it with us if you're comfortable with doing so. But this is really your internal worksheet to kind of start to build your data story over time. You'll find a couple of additional instructions here on the slides below. And then these are kind of the work area slides that we've got going for you. So this was the slide that we actually spent some time on during the last session, was determining which of the social determinants of health factors that you maybe are interested in focusing on for your data story, and maybe what additional factors are intersecting with that. We talked a little bit about like where you might start to discover or determine what those are. So we actually will have the recording of that session up soon. So if you'd like to go back and revisit that. But if you are new this session, welcome you to start kind of thinking about that. So thinking about what are the factors that are impacting people's health kind of upstream of coming into contact with healthcare facilities. What are those factors that are impacting someone's ability to thrive? And then this is the slide that's new for this week. And we'll spend a little bit more time kind of thinking about this and filling it out in small group discussions shortly. So for folks who are coming back from last week or from 2 weeks ago, you can also take a left click on one of these slides, or if you're on a Mac, I kind of do a control click. And then you can copy that specific slide and paste it into your slide deck if you've got a working one already. So that's just some little instructions on how to use this guide. We have some guiding questions in here. You can make other notes as well. These just give a little bit more instruction around what you can do. I thought I saw a chat just now, but maybe Zoom controls were having issues. So anyways, yes, please follow that link and those instructions, and that will help us as we move into small groups. And the questions that we're kind of asking you this time should go along well with what you have in those slides. But we are thinking about this time, kind of what are you wanting from your data? What are the things that you want your data, that you're curious about, that you think your data could help to illustrate, or that you maybe don't know the answer yet to, or maybe you know the answer, but need a little bit more proof points, more things to back it up. And then also thinking about some of those things that Rochelle just talked about. How are you identifying whether those data sources are credible? Who is being involved? What is being asked of them? Who maybe isn't involved or is excluded specifically from the data collection? And how do you kind of start to determine that, and those concerns that maybe you have around the data? So again, we're talking about specifically the data that maybe is existing already that you know about. But there may be other places where you're thinking, okay, I want to talk about housing. So I can find, maybe home property values, but I don't know any of the neighborhood stories. I don't know what came before this data point collection. I don't know the people or the policies maybe that are involved in making sure that a neighborhood looks a specific way. So start to kind of think about what are the different areas of exploration that you might go down in order to learn more about that social determinant of health focus or focus areas. Rochelle, anything you wanted to add about the small group time?
Just wanted to share that I've created groups of about 4 or 5 people. And so we encourage you to introduce yourselves to each other and maybe where you're located. Please give time for each person to respond to the questions, and then we'll come back as a large group and debrief. And then we'll continue our conversation about data sources, which I think we're really excited about, to do a little bit of crowdsourcing with you and to continue to share data that's available on the CEC website. So we'll go ahead and set up the rooms, and I've got a timer for them to close after 15 minutes. And we'll look forward to seeing you back here. Does anyone have any questions before we leave? All right. I will open all rooms. Enjoy your conversations. Welcome back. We'd love to hear from you about what themes may have come up in your conversations, or a takeaway that you're having from your group time together. And we encourage you to maybe get on video if you'd like, and unmute and share, or you may share in the chat as well. So what did you all talk about? I'm going to call on group 1 first, which was Ariel, Heather, and Joelle. Would somebody like to share?
I need to hop off here. I have a meeting in 1 minute. However, we talked about, at least I talked about, the integrity of our data and how difficult it is to collect. And I also did admit that I did miss the first 38 minutes of this presentation. So I'm looking forward to watching the recording. But I think it's difficult to tell a story when you don't trust your data, or when you don't have enough of it for it to be meaningful. We spoke about the language that you use when you collect, when we're collecting data, to make it so that people are more likely to answer the questions truthfully and give you an answer. The degree of trust that people have to have with you before they'll answer questions. So yeah, and also the importance for me in a community health center to have a strong community health worker program to get boots on the ground and help collect information. So, and with that, I need to jump out. So thank y'all so very much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Joel, for joining us. All right, room 2 was Amy, Annie, and Nicole. Would one of you like to share a takeaway from your conversation?
I can share.
Yeah.
We all talked about how we're using data and the work that we're currently doing. So I'll just share that Nicole has been doing a lot of work on social determinants of health and is actually having like a big presentation this evening. So good luck to her, and kind of to present data back to like a coalition who will then drive kind of where they go from here. And it was a combination of like collecting what's available through like the state, and then figuring out what else there is to collect. And so that's what Amy kind of talked about too, around just like the combination of what is available and then how do you then go collect the data that's still needed that, you know, isn't out there yet. So
Yeah, thanks for raising that up. And actually that's a great cue up for our next session in a couple of weeks, is on the how do you go about collecting data that where you have some gaps. So we'll talk about that a little bit more next time. So I'll go on to room 3. Thank you, Annie, where there was another Annie, David, and Zach. Anyone want to share from your group?
Yeah, we just got to talking. I guess Annie used to work down here in Durango at San Juan Basin with some other coworkers of mine, so had some of that. And then, yeah, just chatting about similar data sets that we're both looking at. And we were just kind of getting into the very last 20 seconds. We were getting into some of those bits, like, what are you doing with that? How are you using this? Are we doing the same thing? What could be neat? Yeah, like what we're doing the same stuff. We're looking at similar things. Let's kind of talk about that if we've been staring at the same spreadsheets for the last week.
Oh my gosh, that's great that happened unexpectedly. So glad when there can be collaboration around data, and that you can leverage efforts instead of duplicate them. So hopefully you can stay in contact with each other. All right, well, thank you all for sharing. And if there's any other reflections that anyone wants to share in the chat, please do share. We'd love to hear from you. We do want to talk now about data sources, because we know that there are very many local, regional, state, and even national data sources that we can use on a very local level. So for some of you have been seeing the Equity Data Navigator in the past, if you joined us on previous sessions, but we'd love to maybe do a little mini case example here. You talked broadly, for those of you that shared back around the data that you're looking at, but we'd love to maybe kind of go into the Equity Data Navigator, which is our tool on the Colorado Equity Compass that has neighborhood level data related to social health factors or social determinants as we talk about them, and allows you to kind of take a look at different factors that can influence health, and look at it based on a census track. So it gets down into pretty detailed level information, and you can do comparisons between neighborhoods or between counties or a census tract within a county. I didn't hear a specific social determinant of health or count area. Zach, what county are you in again? You're in Mesa County. Alina remembers. Or you just no?
Is that right?
Zach, I'm down here in La Plata County.
Oh, La Plata. Okay.
All right. Let's take a look at your region. And was there? So for those of you that are new again to the CEC and the Equity Data Navigator, the data is all presented in hopefully really accessible ways. In the panel on the right, you'll see some instant information on demographics about the county. You'll see it based on certain social determinants of health that we know are highly related to health outcomes, and you'll see it by race and ethnicity as well. On the bottom part of the screen, you'll see the health outcomes that we're looking at, the average life expectancy, whether it's above or below the state average in that little yellow capsule. You'll also see self-reported good health, self-reported good mental health, and then the racial diversity of the residents. So Zach, when you were talking about data that you were looking at, was it that focused on a particular issue area or factor that we might have data on?
The big one there that a lot of us were looking at was a bunch of the Healthy Kids Colorado survey data, and kind of pulling through that and seeing, what works. Cause it's statewide. I'm looking at mostly region 9 and probably looking to compare that to the state. And then just kind of seeing how we can use that to reflect on any little things kind of more regional.
Okay. Great.
I'm down here in the small corner, so I've got to figure out all sorts of rural options for data and what we can get, and what other stuff I can find here. So that can be kind of a challenge as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. So on the Equity Compass, we do have data on health outcomes. I think, Alina, were you going to click on a particular census tract or?
Sure, I can.
Okay. So just so that you can all see the census tract level data that kind of pops up as well. And Zach, you're in an area where there's some pretty large census tracts with small populations. And so there, as you said, there's some nuances to consider when you're looking at census tracts that have smaller population groups and what that means in terms of when data is presented as a mean or a median, et cetera. But as you can see here, we have all the data by different social determinants of health. And under health services, you can see that is like performing above the state average. The line in the middle shows where the state average is. And then you can see for this particular census tract that the data is indicating performance below the state average for economic, environment, food, and housing. But then if you click into each of these, you can see a little bit more data, the data that comprises that metric, and what the information has. So we wanted to just make sure we were kind of sharing this tool again with folks and offering the opportunity to really dig into this information to find out how particular neighborhoods might be doing in your areas, your communities. Heather, I see your hand is up. Did you have a question?
Hi, yeah, I'm with Zach. I'm down here in Durango, Colorado, and the San Juan Basin Health just recently launched their community health survey. And so as the economic development representative on that committee, I would be really interested to see how once we get those results back from that survey, how they compare with, for example, right away when it said that the health services are performing above the state average. That's why data is so cool, because I would take a guess, and Zach, you can push back or back me up here, that from a perception standpoint, it would be below the state average. If you just asked people, like, how would you rate health service performance? Now, I don't know what they mean by health service performance for this particular dashboard, or health services, health services, whether that's the number available or something else, but I don't know. Zach, do you have a opinion on that?
Yeah, I think with some of these, especially down to the census tract level, I mean, I'm already in a small enough county, and then we start splitting it up to look at the tiny little chunks of that. It gets a little Yeah, it just gets a little trickier. Like I think, I mean, even that last track you were looking at had 0 medical facilities per 10,000 residents, was the number there. And so, yeah, I'm not sure how that gets us towards an average response when our average there is 0. So yeah, I think with some of these really small ones in our area, it's a little harder to find something that feels a little more accurate to me.
Yeah, thank you, Heather and Zach, for providing that context. And I think that's why we recognize that this is the quantitative data that we have access to that's populating the Equity Data Navigator. And we want to make sure we're pairing this data with stories and other lived experience that would be representative of what the community is experiencing or what their perspective is. And so, for example, if we had any stories from La Plata County, those would show up at the bottom of the screen here. But currently we don't. So we'd love to think about are those La Plata?
Yeah, they should be. Yeah.
Okay, because they're showing up. So these are like geo-tagged to La Plata, to this region that is being shown right now. And so it's just a way to give more perspective. As we talked about earlier, the qualitative data gives us more perspective and a bigger picture on what the community is experiencing. And Heather, would love to think about, as that data is being collected, one of the goals of CEC, of the Colorado Equity Compass, is to look at how can we integrate more localized data that's being collected and make that available on this site too. So we'd love to stay in touch. Yeah,
I think we might be able to help with that, and maybe San Juan Basin Health as well. I'm not sure, but we, as the Economic Development District, we are an affiliate with our state demographer, and so there's a couple things we do. A lot of the census data, we do like to tap our state demographer on the shoulder because they're very helpful and they're very good about being able to help us get some of the noise out of the census data, especially for our smaller communities. Now, of course, for some of the low population areas, I mean, we have towns that have less than 1,000 people in them, so they're really considered frontier. And so some data has to be suppressed too. So, but the state demographer is really great as well to help us make sure that it's accurate. Sometimes the national numbers, and not some, I mean, census is accurate. I'm not indicating that's not accurate, but sometimes other data sources that show national numbers, for example, like housing data, things like that, childcare. We do like a livable wage report, and we do a lot of work to really localize that. Because if you look at, for example, rental costs or housing costs in Southwest Colorado, and you base them on the national numbers, it's really off. Ours are much higher. Yeah.
Thank you for adding in that perspective and the reminder about the state demographer. We'll have to make sure we reach out as well. So this is probably a good segue into just asking you all around what are some of your favorite data sources? We do host some on the CEC website, but we're always looking to identify more so that we can become kind of a repository of data sources for Coloradans. And so you can see that Alina went into our resources page and clicked on the data source tab for the type of resource. And we do have quite a few listed here, but we know we need more. And so we'd love to hear from you around what are some of your data sources. Eve, if you could put the Menti back into the chat, that'd be great. We'll keep this open for a little while because we do want to hear from you so that we can continue to enhance what is available on the Colorado Equity Compass. And, we're going to continue to offer these learning sessions so that we can continue to hear from folks around where they're going for data and how the Colorado Equity Compass might be able to partner so that we can offer a well-rounded picture of Colorado as we continue this work. So if you don't mind adding some in, that would be great. And some of the data sets that we lean on for the CEC do pull on some state level data. So thanks for sharing. Is there anyone else? Oh, Alina, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I we welcome the very local data sets that you all are talking about as well, because that's something, as we were previewing with the stories type of data, we're also looking at local data sets as well, and seeing how to geotag those. So if folks are working within the same communities, that they're able to access and find, oh, these are some other great data sets that folks have used within this area. So that's kind of a next up and coming, hopefully soon, feature of the Data Navigator.
Thank you, Alina. It's great to see some of these popping up. So we'll make sure to get these onto our site as well and work with our collective around how to integrate more local data into the space. All right. Is there anyone else that wants to do a little offer their geographic region and look into anything on the Equity Data Navigator set that we can highlight for you? We're happy to do that. And thank you, Annie, for being with us.
This is Nicole,
Yes.
have had issues finding, and I don't know if you can find it on here, but out in the eastern I-70 corridor, so like Bennett, Strasburg, Byers, Deer Trail, but trying to find information on food stamps or the number of families that are on food assistance. Trying to find that data has been mind-boggling. Like, I couldn't find it and I gave up. I'm like, well, because I can find for the entire Adams County region. However, Brighton is so different than we are out here. Like, it's not a true representation of how it is out here because we are more rural.
Right.
So I don't know if anybody has suggestions for that, or if this could be if it's on here. I've been to the SNAP site, like, yeah.
Interesting, Nicole. So I think that's part of the reason why the Colorado Equity Compass was even developed, was kind of recognizing that within counties, there's so much variation across neighborhoods. And so that's why we wanted to go to census tract level data. So unfortunately, the CEC does not have food stamp data on as well on it right now. But every time we engage in these kind of conversations, we're identifying like this is an interest that people have or need. And so we are happy to note that and work with our data partner and see, is it available some other way? Sometimes what our data partner has been able to do is look at making small area estimates based on some of the county level data. And so we're actually going into a data refresh in the next next quarter. And so we'll take a look at that and see if that's something we can add.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just, because it falls under the economic and hardship piece, and it's just hard to find that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or gaps that you're experiencing? All right. Okay, Eve, maybe we can show our last few slides then. And just a reminder that we do invite you to share information about the CEC and we're always looking for stories. So if there are any existing stories that you have or know of, we look for blogs or for videos or infographics. We'd love to continue to highlight the stories that are happening in Colorado. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We are always eager to hear about what people's experiences are with data storytelling, what the needs are as well. You can see different ways to connect with us. And then just final takeaways that you have, if you have any feedback for us in terms of what you took away from this session or anything you want to let us know about this session, we're happy to hear that in the next slide. Again, that's the same Menti link. So if you can share your feedback with us, we'd appreciate that. And just want to acknowledge that the Colorado Equity Compass is also a collaboration amongst the Colorado Health Institute, the Colorado Trust, Consume and Create, and Change Matrix. So thank you again for joining us. Don't forget that we have another session coming up, and that one is focused on, where are there gaps in the data? So Nicole, you kind of primed us for that. And what do we need to do? Like, what are strategies to collect data when we have gaps in our information and knowledge? Alina and Eve, anything else to add in before we hop off?
No, just sort of a reiteration, really just if you have any stories to share or community efforts that you think would be great to highlight on our site, that's something that we're consistently looking for. And I welcome emails at the hello@coequitycompass.org email always. Thank you.
Thanks, Eve. And if you do have any thoughts or ideas for the next session, we welcome those in the Menti as well. Eve, hopefully we're on the next slide. So that people can provide that feedback too. And we'll be in touch via email. Thank you everyone for joining us. Stay warm. I don't know if it's snowing in all of Colorado, but it's certainly snowing where we are. So stay warm and safe. Thank you. And thank you, Lucia, for offering translation for us today.
Thank you, everyone.